All right, we're hot.
Hi, I'm Richard Carroll, and I'm just kicking back here in our pollinator garden at Cary Tree Archive. The Cary Tree Archive idea is to restore a native ecosystem, not just planting trees, but to actually restore the ecosystem from the ground up, from the forest floor to the tallest trees that will come in here. And to restore a native ecosystem, it requires pollinators. So one component that we thought that we'd add to the Cary Tree Archive is a pollinator garden of native perennial plants that will attract those native pollinators that will help the tree archive thrive. The birds, bats, bees, butterflies, beetles, small mammals, they all help pollinate our native flora as well as the crops. They say that they're responsible for bringing us one every 3 bites of food that we eat. They sustain our ecosystem and produce the natural resources by helping plants reproduce. Without the actions of pollinators, agricultural economies, our food supply, our surrounding landscapes would collapse. Um, Habitat fragmentation, pesticide use on lawns and gardens, planting of exotic species, characteristics of our suburban landscape that we have all around us lead to the decline in native pollinators, the birds, and the wildlife. In this pollinated garden, we planted a variety of both nectar and food plants. Nectar for the adults of the butterflies and bees, but for food plants for the and host plants for the caterpillars that are here in the sunny location, providing food for many of our local butterfly species that people that walk by here on the White Oak Creek Greenway can enjoy seeing the butterflies flitting around the flowers here in the pollinator garden. By providing the native species um, of plants that are beneficial to hummingbirds and butterflies and bees, that will ensure the food and cover are available for all these colorful species that we have. Just saw a ruby-throated hummingbird in the Virginia bluebells along the outside here just a few minutes ago, just as we were coming in. North Carolina is home to more than 500 species of native bees, many of which are economically important pollinators. These insects are, again, essential for agriculture, home gardens, and the natural habitats of our state. You always think about the honeybee as a pollinator, and it is, of course, a major pollinator of our food crops and native plants. But it's the native bees and butterflies and birds that are the real workhorses of the pollinator world. Honeybees are really adapted to the monoculture type agriculture that we've developed, here and everywhere in this country and around the world. And because they've destroyed natural habitat of the natural vegetation and the flowers and the food plants that the pollinators would need, they have to import pollinators and put the bee boxes next to those fields in order to ensure pollination of their crops. Honeybees, and people think when they think of pollinators and they think of bees, they think of honeybees. And there's a lot of downsides to honeybees. Raising honeybees is a very complicated affair, and it requires a good deal of expertise and equipment. But honeybees are a non-native species. They get a lot of support from beekeepers, and of course they're commercially valuable as pollinators. However, they because they're non-native, they're subject to a lot of ills, the mites and various other diseases that attack those non-native pollinators. Um, as I said, there's over 500 different native bees in North Carolina that don't get the kind of support that honeybees get as far as people providing hives and all to raise them. They depend on native vegetation. In a garden like this that we intentionally made, or a small patch, in your backyard, contiguous hopefully with your neighbor's backyard, they'll provide both food for the caterpillars, host plants, as well as nectar for those migrating monarchs and other butterflies that we might find around here. And so, as I was saying, honeybees are great, but they're non-native species, and they get lots of support to help pollinate the crops that we need. But those poor native pollinators, with habitat destruction, pesticide use, and urbanization, they're running out of space and habitat. So these kind of patches of both forage and food are really important to sustain those populations. With these threats that are facing the native pollinators from habitat loss, degradation, fragmentation, the native vegetation is replaced by roadways, manicured lawns, crops, and non-native gardens. Pollinators end up losing their food and their nesting sites that it will ensure their survival. Migratory pollinators face some real special challenges. If the distances between suitable habitat patches along the migratory routes is too large, the smaller and weaker individuals might die during the route. That's why even having a small pollinator garden in your backyard and encouraging your neighbors to plant native pollinator species. Everybody, milkweed is very popular to help support the monarchs, because the monarch caterpillar feeds only on milkweed, so it's a host plant for the monarchs. And the different milkweeds are beautiful plants. You plant a few of them in your backyard with some other native wildflowers, and you can have your own little mini pollinator garden as well, and enjoy the beauty of the butterflies that stop by for a snack, and the caterpillars that are having a meal in your backyard. So our pollinator garden here at the archive will help the pollinators to support the restoration of the native forest ecosystem here in the Carey Tree Archive. The perennial native species of plants that have been selected will provide nectar, food, beauty, and blooms throughout the season. The design is planned so that the flowering is sequential throughout the season and into the fall and even the winter months down here in our mild climate of North Carolina. So, please come by and become inspired to grow your own pollinator garden at home. Volunteers are very welcome to plant and maintain our gardens and our trees here at the Carey Tree Archive. You're all welcome to come by and talk to George McDowell and myself, and there's plenty of work to do. We'd love to have you come on by. The technical inspiration for the planting of this pollinator garden came from Debbie Roos, the Chatham County Extension agent, who has a beautiful pollinator garden called Pollinator Paradise at the Chatham Square in Pittsboro. And she teaches workshops and courses and taught me the little that I've been able to learn about pollinator gardens and the inspiration for doing this. But the philosophical and emotional inspiration came much earlier. And I'd like to read you a little dedication. This garden, these flowers in the sun, are dedicated to my mother, Lillian May Wolcott Carroll. Lil the Flower Lady, who made the love of nature a fundamental part of my life. My mom was known as Lil the Flower Lady. She was the naturalist in residence, and I was Mother Nature's son. She ran the Nature Center at Camp Laurel Hill, the Girl Scout camp in our little town of Cheshire, Connecticut. So I am a Yankee. Anyone who found a turtle or snake would bring it to her to identify. She taught principles of conservation biology to scouts and to my sister and me. Her conservation list cataloged those native plants and animals that were rare or had a key role in the ecosystem and should not be disturbed. She taught conservation biology before conservation biology was cool. This was the foundation that would support me throughout my career and in every aspect of my life. Cheshire was a farm town then, and my parents' turkey farm had as many as 10,000 free-ranging turkeys in the back lot. It was intimidating to stand eye to waddle with those turkeys. On the farm and in the woods, we learned common sense, not hard and fast rules. She taught us not only to know nature on a first-hand basis, but to feel the flow of life deeply. At that time, I could walk 20+ miles from Cheshire to New Haven, Connecticut, without crossing a road. Now, as in Cary, those New England farms grow houses. A paradigm shift has taken place, and most current residents are completely unaware of what these towns once were. The Cary Tree Archive is an ecosystem restoration program. It is a reminder of what was and still can be. The paradigm shift can shift back. It is a vision for rebirth, a place where we can feel the flow of life again, as my mother taught us. Join us to rebuild this vision. Plant native trees, rebuild the soil, and feel the shade. The pollinator garden is a small part of this ecosystem and contains many of the native plants on my mother's conservation list. These are the plants that attract native bees, butterflies, and other native species that pollinate the crops that become our food, as well as the trees in the archive. This is the paradigm shift on which our life depends. Listen to your mother.
Every time I hear her read that, I cry. Hi, my name's George McDowell. Thank you very much for having us. Dan, thank you for inviting us. We're in the Cary Tree Archive, sitting next to a longleaf pine. The idea for the Cary Tree Archive was born 2 years ago in September when Dave Berger, the president of the Homeowners Association, asked me to plant some trees in this 8 acres, which is essentially a mowed field of weeds and grass. So I thought I and my friends could plant a few trees, and in that year and a half we planted, I think, 172 trees, and by the end of the year the archive will be completely planted out. Archive is 8 acres, just west of the Taylor Family YMCA across Cary Parkway. The White Oak Greenway runs through it, which is also a segment of the East Coast Greenway, which runs from Maine to the Florida Keys. So this area gets quite a few people, and about 5 times as many since the pandemic started. When we started to plant, there were some crepe myrtle trees and some Norway maples and a few willow oaks, and we've decided to plant it out fully. We're going to make a recreation of a longleaf pine savanna, as Cary at one time was dominated by longleaf pines, and they were cut down by Mr. Page, who founded Cary, and didn't replant them. So we dedicated 1/3 of an acre to the recreation of a longleaf pine savanna. We're also going to dedicate 1/3 of an acre to a fruit and nut orchard inspired by Lee and Dargan of Towards Zero Waste. And their vision is that folks walking by on the Greenway will be able to stop by and pick a snack that's unpackaged and requires no waste whatsoever. What's the little one's name?
Milan.
How old?
5 minutes.
Our first planting was on September the 28th, 2019. We had Cub Scouts from Pack 120, the owner of A to Z Pharmacy, and her husband and daughter, and 3 political candidates. 3 candidates running for office, and I'll say that all 3 of whom, after planting trees, won their elections. Since that day, we've had 27 plantings by different groups, and I'll run through them. They were Dude Solutions, the Hakhtar family, who planted a tree in honor of their son, on whose 3rd birthday it was. The Sant Nirankari Mission planted a tree in memory and honor of their recently departed Satguru. Gamers Nexus, the wildly successful Cary YouTube channel, planted trees along with the Sierra Club. We've had the Cary Women's Club plant trees for the Triangle Volunteers, MetLife, Towards Zero Waste, Lee and Dargan and their board members, more trees by the Cub Scout Pack 120, Girl Scout Troop 785, 3 more candidates for public office, only one of whom was successful. Trees Durham planted, Katie Rose Levin and her husband Don, and a Boy Scout doing an Eagle Project, and the Carrie Page Rotary Club. Also, Carrie's chapter of Zeta Phi Beta, an international service sorority, planted 5 trees in honor of their 5 founding fathers who founded the sorority in 1920 at Howard University. We expect the Cary Tree Archive to be fully planted out by Christmas of 2021. In 27 months, without having spent a ton of money, and through the donated expertise and volunteer labor, we started the transition of this 8 acres into a much more useful and beneficial area both for human beings and for wildlife. In addition to the literally hundreds of benefits that trees confer on humanity and wildlife, we learned 2 additional facts recently, which I think are very important. A realtor with whom I walked through the archive gave the opinion that as these trees mature, the 30-some houses which abut the archive will increase tremendously in value. And Basil, the owner of Leaf and Limb, suggested that the Homeowners Association fees for maintenance of this area will be cut by 80% in a few years, and that's once we begin to transition the grass and weeds into a natural forest floor. Richard read something to you, and I'd like to read something to you also. This is from Bertram Whittier Wells, who wrote The Natural Gardens of North Carolina, and he wrote in 1932, almost 100 years ago. He said, "The North Carolinian of today, who speeds across the open country in his fast car, can hardly imagine what his state was like when the original forest covered it. At the time Columbus was becoming acquainted with America's shoreline, the plants were in almost complete domination of this country. Over vast areas stretched the unbroken forest. On the trails through it, one could travel for days without a good view of the sun, and at night the constellations could seldom be seen because of the interfering canopy of high verdure." He wrote that in 1932. Our hope is that today, as one travels through the archive in daytime, he does not have a good view of the sun. And when she travels through in the nighttime, that she seldom see the constellations. Thank you for your kind attention to our little video, and Richard and I are here to answer questions and solicit advice and suggestions. Thank you very much.